Looking at top-level controller players' settings and understanding why they have them the way you do can really help you hone in on your perfect settings. And today, we're going to break down 2 of the top controller players in the world, their settings, and how you can decide which type of settings are best for you. With that out of the way, let's get right into it. First up on our list of controller legends, it's TSM's newest addition, Verhulst. He is a player notorious for his quick rise to fame with insane aim and fighting mechanics that have quickly catapulted him into one of the best in the game. Looking closer, Verhulst's approach to his settings is very approachable compared to a lot of pro players. Most people think you have to have perfectly fine-tuned ALC settings that account for every scenario to be a top-level player. Verhulst smashes this myth as he doesn't even use ALC settings. While he's mentioned looking to transition to them recently, he's been dominating Apex lobbies his entire career on 4-4 with classic respawn curve and no-look dead zone. While he does bump up his 3x optics and higher to 5 look sense to make up for the zoom, Verhulst is the perfect example of how little you need to do to your settings as long as you're comfortable with them. His sensitivities are incredibly easy to set up and likely really similar to what a lot of Apex players already play on, rather than being fine-tuned and unique like some other pro players. The bottom line is, this is a player with some of the best aim in the world, playing on one of the most simplistic sensitivity setups you're ever gonna see. And this is an important aspect of his settings to take note of. You don't have to spend hours on end finding the exact settings that work perfectly for every situation. There's a ton of players that do not use ALC settings at all. While they are the more advanced control options, a lot of pro players actually value their muscle memory on their settings as well as the simplicity of the adjustments more than the in-depth ALC option. Now, this might surprise you because you're always hearing about how important ALC settings really are and how they can completely change your game. While they can give you a lot more customization, this extra freedom really isn't needed. On the flip side, Verhulst does make some very unique changes to his controller scheme. While his sense is pretty streamlined, his button layout is anything but that. He plays on a default controller without paddles and doesn't play claw. However, his controller scheme still allows him to keep his thumbs on his thumbsticks while using all of his major inputs. By swapping his fire and ADS to his bumpers, putting crouch on left trigger, tactical ability on right trigger, and then having swap weapon on his left stick click, he creates a unique scheme that works really well for him. And by having auto sprint enabled and mapping less buttons like melee to his face buttons, he's able to have a competitive controller scheme without having to spend money on a controller with paddles. He also values playing with a default controller, again, because of his comfort on the input. Having paddles requires you to learn an entirely new button layout, and this is something Verhulst has not seen necessary to compete. So you guys might ask what you can take away from looking at a player like Verhulst. Well, if you feel like your controller or simplistic settings are holding you back, Verhulst is a perfect example of how dominant you can be even with a seemingly simple control layout. All you need is a system, a controller, some very minor adjustments, and you can be running the same exact setup that Verhulst uses in his professional matches. Now, it's important to be comfortable with your settings, but if you're constantly adjusting or obsessing over them, it's just gonna throw off your game. The next time you go to change your settings for the 3rd time in a week, think of Verhulst and remember that the settings don't make the player makes the settings. As we move into our next pro's settings, if you're really struggling to see results, even after you've dialed into what seem like the perfect settings, head over to ProGuides.com. There, you can find top-level controller players ready to help you with any aspect of your game. From the time you leave the dropship to the moment you get the win, these coaches are trained to get you wherever you want to be. If you're ready to finish out the first split strong, make sure to check out the top link in the description below. Moving into another insane controller player settings, Genburten is a household name in the Apex community at this point. His aim is absolutely incredible, and he is a player that's known for having crazy precision and speed with his aim, especially for a controller player. He achieves this by playing on a really precise sensitivity layout. While he keeps his dead zones and outer thresholds low, what really stands out is the response curve being on 0. This is the same as being on linear when not using ALC settings and takes away all aim acceleration or ramp up time. This is the core of Genburten's settings, as he wants his aim to be as responsive and consistent as possible. A lot of players look to implement look acceleration to smooth out their aim, allow them to have higher accuracy while still being able to ramp up to high speeds for those bigger movements. Genburten, however, looks to remove all signs of look acceleration and play on a high base sense to make up for it. By playing on 500 yaw in pitch speed, he's able to manipulate his POV really easily when navigating the map, performing movement, or fighting in close range. Then he runs a lower 130 ADS yaw in pitch speed, allowing him to have a lower sense as soon as he aims down sight. The important thing to realize is that his sensitivities are the raw sense at all times. Since he doesn't have any acceleration or change in his response curve, he has it set up so that whatever his sensitivity is for his different aiming modes, that sense is consistent at all times. While he might have a much faster hipfire sense than ADS sensitivity, he has constant speed in each of these respective aiming modes. Genburten plays claw, so his layout is a bit more standard than a layout like Verhulst. When you're using your controller like this, you're still looking to map your inputs so you never have to remove your thumb from the thumbstick. However, you can get away with mapping usable inputs to the top face buttons, as you'll be able to reach them with ease. This style of holding the controller really opens up your options for your inputs. Just make sure you actually watch a video on how to properly implement this technique before you switch over to doing it. It can cause stress on your hands if done incorrectly, but it's a method that a lot of top players use. Now, this setup is great if you're an incredibly skilled controller player, looking to make the most of your aim. The thing to keep in mind with Genburten's settings, as he mentions himself, if you're not precise, your aim just isn't going to be. Just as much as these settings give you the ultimate control to hit a ton of shots, they also put you in control of missing them as well. Everything you do, from tracking a target to controlling your recoil, is going to feel drastically different depending on your settings. But one thing is for sure, these settings are going to feel the most responsive. If you give these settings a shot, be sure to give it some time. While every setting change is going to feel different, if you're adjusting your response curve or extra yaw or pitch speed, it's going to feel like quite the adjustment. Recognize these settings for the hardcore controller settings that they are, and be sure to give yourself the time and effort needed to get comfortable on them. Now, as you guys can see, these are two very different approaches to controller setups. Verhulst's settings for his sensitivities are rather streamlined, offering him very stable approaches to his aim. While it might not be the flashiest sensitivity, it puts a focus on having very stable, consistent aim. While he might not be whipping his POV around, doing insane movements, he can still perform all the movements that he needs to do, and have an incredible shot. His button layout is a great example of a player who made adjustments to fit their situation, become comfortable with them, and then rose to the top. While his button layout might seem a little bit weird, it's largely created this way to get around needing paddles or to play claw. And I personally can really appreciate settings like this because they're clearly made with his play in mind every step of the way. On the flip side, Genburten settings are all about opening the floodgate and allowing you to have the ultimate control. By using ALC settings effectively, he's able to crank his sensitivity up so he can have really crisp movement while still having a slower ADS sense for hitting those precise shots. On top of this, his very precise dead zones and response curve give him complete control of his aim. By having all acceleration removed from his stick movement, he's looking to have his stick movement mimic his in-game POV adjustments as closely as possible. Now, this is great for really precise players who want the most responsive input possible. Just remember, this does go both ways. And just like it leaves you more room for your mechanics to shine, it also leaves more room for you to make a mistake. Guys, your first job is to understand why these players have their settings the way you do and how these different approaches to settings should change what you stick with. I hope this video was able to not only inform you of some of the best controller settings in the world, but also the key distinction between some pros and how their settings can impact the way you play. As always, guys, it's been your boy Valued. Let me know in the comments below which one of these pro settings you're the closest to, and I'll see you guys in the next one.